I'm Sarah, 34, and I thought my grief was the worst thing I'd face after losing my husband Michael to cancer. But as mourners filed out of the funeral home, my sister Amanda cornered me with documents that would shatter everything I believed about my marriage, my family, and my entire life. The will she thrust into my trembling hands revealed not just Michael's final wishes, but a devastating secret that had been hiding in plain sight for 8 years. What she told me next changed everything I thought I knew about blood, loyalty, and the people we trust most. Before we dive into this shocking family betrayal story, I need to ask, what do you think happens when the person you trust most in the world turns out to be your greatest enemy? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and if you're ready for a story that'll make you question everything about family loyalty, hit that like button and subscribe because this tale of sister versus sister revenge will leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't see this ending coming. The funeral home felt suffocating as the last of Michael's colleagues offered their condolences. I'd been married to him for 12 years, and the past 6 months of watching cancer slowly steal him away had left me emotionally drained. Amanda had been my rock throughout his illness, helping with hospital visits, bringing meals, even taking time off work to drive me to appointments when I was too overwhelmed to function. "Sarah, we need to talk privately," Amanda said, her voice unusually cold as she approached me near the casket. Her 8-year-old son Jake stood beside her, unusually quiet for a child who normally couldn't sit still. I assumed she wanted to discuss funeral arrangements or maybe offer more help with settling Michael's affairs. We'd always been close, only 2 years apart. We'd shared everything growing up. When our parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, we'd leaned on each other even more. She was the maid of honor at my wedding. I was there when Jake was born after her relationship with his father fell apart. "Of course," I replied, following her to a quiet corner of the funeral parlor. "What's on your mind?" Amanda's hands shook as she pulled out a manila envelope from her purse. "There's something you need to know about Michael. Something I should have told you years ago." The way she said it made my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" "Michael left a will. A real one. Not the one you have." She handed me the envelope with trembling fingers. "And there's something else. About Jake." I stared at her, confusion mixing with a growing dread. "Amanda, you're scaring me. What about Jake?" "He's not just my son, Sarah." Her voice cracked. "He's Michael's son too." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, gripping a nearby chair for support. "That's not possible. You said Jake's father left before he was born. You said you didn't want to talk about him. Because I was protecting you. And protecting myself." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but there was something else there, something that looked almost like relief. "Michael and we had an affair. It started about a year after you got married. It lasted for 3 years." My world tilted. The funeral parlor seemed to spin around me as I processed her words. No, that's not true. Michael would never." But even as I said it, memories started flooding back. The late nights he explained away with work. The business trips that seemed to multiply after our 3rd anniversary. The way Amanda always seemed to know his schedule, always seemed to be available when he needed help with something. "The will, Sarah. Read the will." She pressed the envelope into my hands. "He left everything to Jake. The house, the life insurance, his retirement accounts. Everything." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope. The legal document was official, notarized, dated just 2 months ago when Michael's condition had worsened. My eyes scanned the pages, each line feeling like another knife to my chest. My husband, the man I'd nursed through cancer, the man I'd loved with everything I had left his entire estate to my sister's son. To his son. "There's a letter too," Amanda said quietly. "He wrote it for you." I found the handwritten note tucked behind the legal documents. Michael's familiar handwriting blurred through my tears as I read his explanation. How the affair had started during a rough patch in our marriage that I didn't even remember having. How he tried to end it but couldn't stay away from Amanda. How when she got pregnant, they decided to keep the secret to protect me. How he'd been secretly supporting Jake financially all these years through fake business expenses and cash withdrawals I'd never questioned. He wanted to tell you, Amanda continued, her voice barely a whisper. Especially after the diagnosis. But I convinced him it would be cruel to burden you with this while he was dying. I looked up at her, rage beginning to replace shock. Cruel? You think this is less cruel? Finding out at his funeral that my entire marriage was a lie? Sarah, please. And you. I stood up, my voice getting stronger as the full impact hit me. You sat at my dinner table. You hugged me when I cried about being unable to have children. You held my hand in the hospital while I watched my husband die, knowing that you'd been sleeping with him. Knowing that you had his child. Jake, who had been quietly coloring in a corner, looked up at us with concern. Seeing him now, I couldn't believe I'd never noticed. The dark hair like Michael's. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking, exactly like his father did. The dimple in his left cheek that I'd always thought was cute on my nephew, never realizing it was a family trait from the man I'd married. Where does this leave me? I asked, my voice hollow. Legally, I mean. We were married. Don't I have any rights to our home, our life together? Amanda's expression shifted, and for the first time, I saw something that looked almost predatory. The will is ironclad, Sarah. Michael made sure of that. He was very specific about his wishes. And since Jake is his biological child. She shrugged, as if this enormous betrayal was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. But the house is in both our names. The joint accounts. Check the paperwork again, Amanda interrupted. Michael was very thorough in his planning. Especially after the diagnosis. My hands flew to my purse, pulling out my own copies of our financial documents. How had I not noticed? In my grief and focus on his medical care, I'd signed whatever papers Michael put in front of me. Power of attorney forms, account changes, insurance beneficiary updates, all presented as routine estate planning for a dying man. As I rifled through the documents, the horrible truth became clear. Michael had systematically removed my name from nearly everything over the past 6 months. The house deed had been quietly transferred to a trust with Jake as the beneficiary. Our joint savings account had been closed and the money moved to accounts I'd never seen. Even his life insurance policy, the one I thought would help me start over, listed Jake as the primary beneficiary. You planned this, I whispered, looking between the documents and my sister's face. Both of you. This wasn't just about guilt or making things right for Jake. You orchestrated this. Amanda's mask finally slipped completely. Michael wanted to provide for his son. His real family. I was his wife for 12 years. And I gave him the child you never could. The days following the funeral passed in a haze of disbelief and rage. I'd returned to what I thought was my home, the house Michael and I had bought together 7 years ago, the place where we'd planned to grow old together, only to receive an eviction notice 3 days later. According to the trust documents, I had 30 days to vacate the property that now legally belonged to my 8-year-old nephew. I spent those first nights in our bedroom, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of a marriage that had apparently been built on lies. Every photo on the dresser felt like mockery now. Our wedding pictures, anniversary celebrations, vacation snapshots, how many of those smiling moments had occurred while he was sneaking around with my sister? But grief has a way of sharpening focus, and as the initial shock wore off, I began to think more clearly. Something about Amanda's behavior at the funeral had been off. Not just the cruelty of her timing, though that was bad enough, but the way she'd presented everything. Too confident. Too prepared. Like she'd been rehearsing this moment for years. I started going through Michael's things more systematically, looking for answers to questions I'd never thought to ask. In his office, I found years of financial records that painted a very different picture than the one Amanda had presented. Yes, he'd been supporting Jake financially, but the amounts were enormous. Far more than child support, even generous child support. We're talking about thousands of dollars every month, hidden in fake business expenses and creative accounting that must have taken significant planning. Then I found the phone bills. Michael had kept meticulous records of everything, including old cell phone statements going back years. I'd never had reason to look at them before, but now I studied them with the intensity of a forensic accountant. The pattern was clear once I knew what to look for: regular calls to Amanda's number, sometimes lasting hours, dating back to the second year of our marriage. But what caught my attention was the timing of these calls. They weren't random. They followed a schedule. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening when I was at my book club. Every Saturday morning when I did my yoga class. Every time I went out of town to visit my college friend in Chicago. Michael and Amanda hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been conducting a relationship with the precision of a business arrangement. But the real bombshell came when I found Michael's laptop password and started digging through his email history. He'd kept everything, and I mean everything. Email chains between him and Amanda going back years. Photos they'd send each other. And most damning of all, detailed discussions about how to handle the Sarah situation after his death. The emails revealed a side of both of them I'd never seen. Amanda writing things like, once she finds out about Jake, she'll be too devastated to fight the will effectively. Michael responding with detailed explanations of how he'd been slowly transferring assets to ensure I'd have no legal recourse. They'd even discussed the timing of the revelation, deciding that telling me at the funeral would be most efficient, because I'd be emotionally compromised and less likely to think clearly. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd studied me like a lab rat, analyzing my weaknesses and planning how to exploit them. But the most chilling discovery was a series of emails from 18 months ago, when Michael first received his cancer diagnosis. Amanda had written, "This could actually work in our favor. If you play this right, she'll be so focused on taking care of you that she won't notice the financial changes. And afterward, she'll be too grief-stricken to mount any kind of legal challenge." Michael's response had been even worse: "You're right. She's always been too trusting. Too eager to believe the best in people. It's actually one of the things I loved about her initially, but now it makes this much easier." They'd weaponized my love for him. Turned my devotion during his illness into a tool for their deception. I printed everything. Every email, every financial document, every piece of evidence that showed the elaborate conspiracy they'd constructed around my life. By the time I finished, I had 3 thick binders full of documentation that told the story of how my husband and sister had spent years planning to destroy me. That's when I found the real estate documents. Hidden in a file labeled Tax Records 2019, I discovered that Michael and Amanda had been house hunting together. Not just looking at properties online, they had toured homes, put in offers, even gotten pre-approved for a mortgage together. The plan had been for them to buy a house together after my divorce from Michael, which they'd apparently assumed I would pursue once I discovered the affair. Except Michael got sick before they could pull the trigger on their plan. The cancer changed everything. Instead of divorcing me and starting a life with Amanda, he decided to die married to me while secretly ensuring that his death would leave me with nothing. There were contract drafts where they'd planned to buy a house in a good school district for Jake. Amanda had already picked out furniture. They discussed which of my belongings they wanted to keep and which they'd donate or sell. My entire life had been parceled out between them like I was already dead. The cruelest detail was a discussion about my wedding ring. Amanda had written that she wanted it for herself as a symbol of her real relationship with Michael, while he'd suggested they sell it and put the money toward Jake's college fund. They debated this like I was already gone, like I'd simply evaporate once their plan was complete. I sat in Michael's office at 3 a.m., surrounded by evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal I could imagine, and felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, but underneath it was growing something harder and more focused. They'd made one crucial mistake in all their planning. They'd underestimated me. For 12 years, I'd been the supportive wife, the loyal sister, the one who put everyone else's needs first. I'd managed Michael's medical care with military precision. I'd coordinated his treatment schedule, researched clinical trials, fought with insurance companies, and somehow kept our household running while working full-time. They thought I was weak because I was kind. They thought I was stupid because I was trusting. They were about to learn the difference between being nice and being a pushover. I spent the rest of that night creating my own files. Copying everything to multiple cloud storage accounts. Researching lawyers who specialized in estate fraud and conspiracy. Looking up private investigators who could help me figure out what else they might be hiding. Because if Amanda and Michael had been this thorough in their deception, I had to assume there was more I hadn't found yet. And if I was going to fight back, really fight back, I needed to know everything. The grieving widow they expected me to be would have accepted this betrayal and quietly faded away. But the woman I was becoming had other plans entirely. I hired private investigator Marcus Chin 3 days before my eviction deadline. Marcus specialized in marital fraud and had 20 years of experience uncovering financial deception. When I walked into his office carrying my 3 binders of evidence, he whistled low under his breath. In 20 years, I've never seen documentation this thorough from the victim's side, he said, flipping through Michael's emails. Usually, the betrayed spouse suspects something but can't prove it. You've got a smoking gun arsenal here. I need to know if there's more, I told him. If they were this careful about hiding their affair and planning the financial fraud, what else might they have been doing? Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with sharp eyes. What kind of timeline are we working with? Because if you want to challenge this will effectively, we need to move fast. I have 3 weeks before I'm officially homeless, I said. But I'm not just trying to get my house back. I want to know everything. Every lie, every hidden asset, every person who might have helped them. That kind of investigation takes time and money. Are you prepared for what we might find? I thought about Amanda's face at the funeral, the rehearsed way she delivered her devastating news. The casual cruelty in her voice when she'd told me I wasn't Michael's real family. The emails where she'd analyzed my weaknesses like a predator studying prey. I'm prepared for anything, I said. Marcus started with the basics, verifying the timeline of Michael and Amanda's relationship. What we discovered was even more extensive than I'd imagined. The affair hadn't been a passionate mistake that developed into something deeper. It had been calculated from the beginning. Security camera footage from various locations showed that Michael and Amanda had been meeting regularly at hotels, restaurants, and even each other's homes for over 5 years. But more disturbing was the pattern Marcus identified. They'd systematically worked to isolate me from other family members and friends who might have interfered with their plans. Look at this, Marcus said, spreading out a timeline he'd constructed. Every time you mentioned getting closer to your cousin Rachel, or rebuilding your friendship with your college roommate, something happened to sabotage it. Michael would suddenly need you for a medical emergency during planned visits. Amanda would create family drama that required your immediate attention. I stared at the timeline, memories clicking into place like puzzle pieces. Rachel had invited me to her wedding in Hawaii 3 years ago, but Michael had insisted he was too sick to travel and couldn't be left alone. Amanda had volunteered to stay with him, and I'd been so grateful for her sacrifice that I'd barely questioned why he seemed completely fine the week after I returned. They were managing my social connections, I realized. Keeping me isolated so I wouldn't have anyone to turn to for support or advice. It gets worse, Marcus said. I ran financial background checks on both of them. Your sister has been living well above her means for years. The apartment she rents? It's in a building owned by a shell company. Guess who's been paying her rent through that shell company? Michael. For 4 years. He wasn't just giving her child support, he was essentially supporting her entire lifestyle. Her car lease, her credit card payments, even Jake's private school tuition. Your husband was funding a second household. The scope of the deception was staggering. Marcus showed me bank records that revealed Michael had been siphoning money from our joint accounts for years, hiding it through a complex network of fake business expenses and shell companies. The money I'd thought we were saving for our future had been steadily disappearing into Amanda's pocket. But the real shock came when Marcus dug into the property records. Sarah, I need you to sit down for this next part, he said, his expression grim. The house you've been living in? The one you thought you jointly owned with Michael? What about it? You never owned any part of it. Michael bought it in his name only, then created fake mortgage documents showing your name. You've been signing fraudulent paperwork for 7 years without knowing it. The room spun around me. That's impossible. I remember signing the mortgage papers. I remember the closing. The closing was real. Your signatures were real. But the documents you signed weren't what you thought they were. You were signing as a witness, not as a co-owner. Very sophisticated fraud. Someone with legal expertise helped them set this up. Marcus pulled out copies of the real documents, and there it was in black and white. I'd never owned my own home. For 7 years, I'd been living in a house that belonged entirely to my husband, making payments on a mortgage that was never mine, believing I was building equity in our shared future. Who helped them? I asked. This level of legal fraud, they had to have professional help. Marcus flipped to another section of his report. Your family lawyer, David Peterson. The one who handled your parents' estate after their accident. He's been working with Michael for years, creating the legal framework for this entire scheme. David Peterson. The man who'd sat with Amanda and me in his office 5 years ago, helping us navigate our parents' will and inheritance. The one who'd seemed so caring and professional, who'd recommended Michael and I update our own estate planning. I'd trusted him completely, never imagining he was already planning how to steal everything from me. There's more, Marcus continued. Peterson has been doing this to other clients too. We're talking about a pattern of estate fraud involving multiple families. Your case just happens to be the most elaborate. Can we prove it? We can prove everything. The question is what you want to do with the proof. I stared at the evidence spread across Marcus's desk. Financial records, fake documents, email chains, photographs, witness statements. A complete picture of how 3 people I'd trusted had conspired to destroy my life. What are my options? Legally, you have grounds to contest the will based on fraud and undue influence. But that could take years and cost a fortune in legal fees. You could also file criminal charges. This level of financial fraud and conspiracy is definitely criminal. What would you recommend? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something that looked like hope. I'd recommend we get creative. Because your husband and sister made one crucial mistake in their planning. What's that? They assumed you'd be too broken and trusting to fight back effectively. But they documented everything, which means we have evidence of every crime they committed. And they involved other people, which means we can flip those people into witnesses. David Peterson. David Peterson is looking at serious prison time if this goes to trial. Lawyers who defraud clients lose their licenses and their freedom. He's going to want to make a deal. I felt something stir in my chest, not just anger anymore, but determination. They'd underestimated me because I'd been kind. They'd assumed I was weak because I'd been loyal. They'd thought they could destroy me because I'd loved them. But love, when it's betrayed this completely, doesn't just disappear. It transforms into something much more powerful. What do we need to do? I asked. Marcus grinned. We need to give them exactly what they gave you, a surprise they'll never see coming. You know, sometimes the people who think they know you best are the ones most shocked when you finally stop being who they expect you to be. If you've ever had someone underestimate you completely, drop a comment about how that felt, because what happens next is going to be the most satisfying part of this entire story. And trust me, you don't want to miss the look on Amanda's face when she realizes her little sister isn't the pushover she thought she married to her lover. 2 weeks after hiring Marcus, I had everything I needed. David Peterson had agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. Apparently, the evidence of his fraud scheme involving multiple clients was overwhelming enough that the state attorney general was already building a case against him. Peterson's cooperation gave us access to all the legal documents, financial records, and communications that had been used to orchestrate my financial destruction. But I wasn't ready to play my hand yet. I had something else in mind first. I called Amanda and asked to meet her for coffee. I kept my voice appropriately broken, still playing the grieving widow role she expected. I suggested we meet at the same cafe where we'd spent countless hours together over the years, talking about everything from work drama to relationship problems. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd probably sat in that same booth, listening to me worry about Michael's health while knowing she was sleeping with him. She arrived right on time, wearing a black dress that managed to look both funeral appropriate and subtly sexy. Even now, even knowing what I knew, she was still performing the role of supportive sister. "How are you holding up?" she asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I know this has all been so overwhelming." I let her hold my hand, studying her face as she delivered what I now recognized as a carefully rehearsed expression of concern. "I've been better," I said. "The house situation is really stressing me out. 30 days seems so fast." "I know, sweetie. But maybe this is an opportunity for a fresh start. You could find a cute little apartment, somewhere easier to manage. Less maintenance, lower expenses. I suppose." I paused, as if something had just occurred to me. "Amanda, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Anything." "When you were with Jake's father, the relationship that ended before he was born. Were you in love with him?" Something flickered in her eyes, but her expression remained sympathetic. "Why do you ask?" "Because I keep thinking about Michael, and how much he would have loved to have children. He always said he regretted that we couldn't have kids of our own. I just wonder sometimes if there was someone out there who could have given him that joy, you know? Someone who could have made him truly happy." Amanda's grip on my hand tightened slightly. "Michael was happy with you, Sarah. He loved you." "Did he? Really?" I let my voice crack just a little. "Because sometimes I wonder if he felt trapped. If he stayed with me out of obligation rather than love. Especially toward the end, when he was making all those changes to his will and his accounts. It felt like he was trying to protect his assets from me." "Sarah, that's not." "I found some things," I interrupted softly. "Going through his office. Financial records that don't make sense to me. Large cash withdrawals over the years that I can't account for. Business expenses that seem unusual." I watched Amanda's face carefully. The sympathetic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something calculating underneath. "I'm sure there's an explanation," she said. "Maybe he was planning some kind of surprise for you. Or maybe there were medical expenses you weren't aware of. Maybe." I nodded, as if accepting her explanation. But there was something else. Phone records. Hours and hours of calls to the same number, going back years. The number isn't in his contacts, so I can't figure out who he was talking to so often. Amanda's hand had gone cold in mine. "Sarah, maybe you shouldn't." "I hired a private investigator," I said quietly. "Just to help me understand the financial situation better. You know, make sure I'm not missing any assets or accounts that might help me keep the house." The color drained from Amanda's face. "A private investigator?" "His name is Marcus Chen. He specializes in estate planning and financial investigations. He's been so helpful in explaining all the legal documents that Michael left behind." Amanda pulled her hand away from mine, reaching for her coffee cup with fingers that weren't quite steady. What kind of things is he investigating?" "Oh, just the usual estate stuff. Verifying assets, checking for hidden accounts, that sort of thing. He did mention that some of the financial patterns he found were unusual. Large, regular payments to various accounts that he wants to trace." "Sarah, I really think you should be careful about." "He also found something interesting about Jake's birth certificate," I continued, my voice still soft and confused. "Did you know that in some states, if there's a question about paternity, they can order DNA testing even years later? Especially if there are inheritance issues involved?" Amanda set down her coffee cup hard enough that it rattled against the saucer. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything," I replied innocently. "Marcus mentioned it as part of his standard investigation process. He said that if Jake is inheriting from Michael's estate, they might need to verify the biological relationship officially. Just standard legal procedure." "That's ridiculous. Jake is my son, and..." "Oh," I know he's your son, I said. But Marcus explained that inheritance law is very specific about biological relationships. If someone is claiming inheritance rights as a biological child, the estate has the right to verify that relationship through DNA testing. It's apparently quite common in disputed estate cases. I watched Amanda process this information, saw the moment when she realized that a DNA test would prove Jake was Michael's child, but would also provide legal evidence of the affair that had been hidden for 8 years. Sarah, you don't understand. This could hurt Jake. He's just a child. How would proving he's Michael's biological son hurt him? I asked, tilting my head with apparent confusion. If anything, it would strengthen his inheritance claim. Amanda stared at me across the table, and I could practically see her mind racing through the implications. A formal paternity test would create legal documentation of Michael's biological relationship with Jake. But it would also create official evidence of the affair, evidence that could be used to challenge the will on grounds of fraud and conspiracy. There's something else, I said, pulling out my phone. Marcus found some email accounts that Michael apparently used for business purposes. He's trying to recover the data from them to make sure we have a complete picture of his financial activities. Amanda's eyes fixed on my phone screen, where I deliberately opened a preview of one of Michael's emails to her. Just enough visible to show her name and a few words about, after Sarah finds out. You see, Marcus thinks that if Michael was hiding financial activities, there might be more assets than what's listed in the will. Assets that could change my financial situation significantly. I looked up at Amanda with wide, innocent eyes. Wouldn't that be wonderful? If there was more money somewhere that could help me avoid losing everything? Sarah, I think you should stop this investigation. For your own good. Why? I asked. Don't you want me to find any hidden assets that might help me? I thought you'd be happy that I might not lose the house after all. Amanda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I have to go. I need to pick up Jake from school. Of course, I said cheerfully. Give him my love. And Amanda? Thanks for being such a supportive sister through all of this. I don't know what I would have done without you. She left without saying goodbye, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her car keys in the parking lot. I sat alone in the cafe for another 20 minutes, sipping my coffee and watching Amanda through the window as she sat in her car, presumably making frantic phone calls. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language told me everything I needed to know. The scared, broken widow she'd expected to manipulate was gone. In her place was someone who'd done her homework, hired professionals, and was asking all the right questions. Someone who was no longer playing defense. Marcus had been right, they'd made their plans based on who they thought I was, not who I actually was. And now that I'd shown Amanda just a glimpse of what I'd discovered, she was going to panic. Panicking people make mistakes. And I was counting on her making a big one. Amanda took the bait exactly as Marcus had predicted. Within hours of our coffee meeting, she'd made 3 critical mistakes that sealed her fate and proved everything we'd suspected about the conspiracy. First, she called David Peterson. Marcus had been monitoring Peterson's communications as part of his cooperation agreement, so we knew immediately when Amanda contacted him in a panic. The recorded conversation was damning, Amanda frantically asking Peterson what would happen if Sarah's investigator found their emails, whether they could claim attorney-client privilege, and whether Peterson thought I was actually smart enough to put the pieces together. Peterson, clearly terrified about his own legal exposure, tried to calm her down while simultaneously covering his own tracks. But his advice revealed the full scope of their original plan. Just stick to the story we planned. Sarah can't prove anything without the original documents, and those are safely stored where she'll never find them. Except we already had copies of all the original documents, thanks to Peterson's cooperation agreement. Amanda's second mistake was going to Michael's grave that same evening. Marcus had anticipated she might do something emotional and potentially incriminating, so he'd arranged for surveillance at the cemetery. The footage was heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure, Amanda standing over my husband's fresh grave, talking to him as if he could hear her. "She's getting too close, Michael," she said to his headstone. "I told you we should have handled this differently. You were too greedy, keeping all those records. Now she's found everything, and I don't know how to fix this. But the real revelation came when she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the headstone and flowers. It seemed like innocent grief behavior until Marcus tracked where those photos went, straight to a social media account we'd never seen before. An account where Amanda had been documenting her relationship with Michael for years, posting photos of them together, referring to herself as his real wife, and sharing intimate details about their life together. The account, created under a fake name, contained hundreds of posts going back to shortly after Jake's birth. Photos of Michael at Jake's birthday parties, school events, family outings that I'd never been invited to. Amanda had been living an entire parallel life with my husband, documenting it obsessively, and building a narrative where I was the interloper in their relationship. The posts revealed a level of delusion that was genuinely disturbing. Amanda hadn't just been having an affair, she'd convinced herself that she was Michael's true partner and that I was somehow in the way of their destiny together. Recent posts talked about finally being free to be together, and no more hiding our love, as if my husband's death was a liberation rather than a tragedy. Amanda's third and most devastating mistake was trying to intimidate Jake into keeping their secret. This was the part that transformed my anger into something much colder and more focused. Marcus had been monitoring Amanda's communications, but we hadn't been surveilling her home directly. We should have been, because that evening, after her cemetery visit, Amanda sat 8-year-old Jake down and tried to coach him on what to say if anyone asked him questions about his daddy Michael. What Amanda didn't know was that Jake had been confused and upset about the family dynamics for weeks. He'd overheard enough adult conversations to understand that something was wrong, and he'd started confiding in his school counselor about his worries. The counselor, concerned about the child's emotional state so soon after a death in the family, had been documenting their conversations. When Amanda tried to convince Jake that he needed to protect Mommy by not talking about Michael to anyone else, Jake became even more distressed. He told the counselor the next day that his mother was acting scary and that he was afraid he'd done something wrong. The counselor, following mandatory reporting protocols, contacted Child Protective Services. That's how we learned about Amanda's attempt to manipulate a grieving 8-year-old into becoming an accomplice to her fraud. The CPS investigation opened up an entirely new avenue of evidence. Jake, interviewed by trained professionals in a safe environment, revealed details about his relationship with Michael that painted a picture of systematic deception. Michael had indeed been acting as Jake's father figure, but he'd also been coaching the boy to keep their relationship secret from me specifically. Daddy Michael said Aunt Sarah would be sad if she knew how much we loved each other, Jake told the CPS investigator. He said it was our special secret, just for our family. The psychological manipulation of a child added another layer of criminality to the conspiracy. It wasn't just financial fraud anymore, it was child endangerment and emotional abuse. Marcus compiled everything into a comprehensive report that read like a crime novel. We had evidence of financial fraud, conspiracy to defraud, identity theft, forgery, child endangerment, and psychological manipulation. But more importantly, we had something that would destroy Amanda's entire narrative, proof that she'd been planning this destruction for years, documenting it obsessively, and involving an innocent child in her scheme. Here's what I think we should do, Marcus said, spreading out a strategic plan across his desk. We don't go to court first. We don't file criminal charges yet. We give Amanda one chance to make this right voluntarily. What do you mean? We arrange a meeting. You, Amanda, and a mediator. Present all the evidence and give her a choice. She can voluntarily surrender the fraudulent inheritance and face civil consequences, or she can fight it and face criminal prosecution for conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. You think she'll take the deal? I think when she sees how much evidence we have, and realizes that fighting this could land her in prison and cost her custody of Jake, she'll make the smart choice. But I had learned something important about my sister over the past few weeks. Amanda wasn't actually very smart, she was just ruthless. And ruthless people don't always make smart choices when they're cornered. Set up the meeting, I said. But Marcus? Have backup plans ready. All of them. The meeting was scheduled for the following Friday in a conference room at Marcus's office. Amanda arrived with a lawyer, not David Peterson, who was now cooperating with authorities, but some expensive-looking attorney who clearly specialized in criminal defense. I arrived with Marcus, a estate attorney, a family law specialist, and copies of evidence that filled 2 bankers' boxes. Amanda walked into that conference room thinking she was going to intimidate me into accepting some kind of compromise. She left knowing that her entire world was about to collapse. But first, she tried one more manipulation that revealed just how completely she misunderstood who she was dealing with. "Sarah," she said, her voice full of fake emotion, "I know you're angry, but we need to think about Jake. He's just a child. Whatever happens between us, he doesn't deserve to be hurt by this." I looked at her across the conference table, this woman who had systematically destroyed my life while pretending to love me, and felt something click into place. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "Jake doesn't deserve to be hurt. Which is why I'm going to make sure he's protected from the consequences of your choices." Amanda smiled, thinking she'd found my weak spot. "So you'll accept the inheritance arrangement? For Jake's sake?" "No," I replied. "I'm going to make sure Jake gets everything Michael intended for him to have. But I'm also going to make sure he gets it through legal, legitimate channels. Not through fraud and conspiracy." The conference room fell silent as Marcus methodically laid out the evidence. Amanda's expensive lawyer, a man named Richard Hayes who'd walked in looking confident and predatory, grew paler with each document Marcus presented. "These are your client's emails discussing how to handle the Sarah situation," Marcus said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "Here's documentation of the shell companies used to hide marital assets. Here's proof that the property deed was fraudulently modified. And here," he placed a final folder in front of Hayes, "is evidence that your client attempted to coach a minor child to lie to investigators." Amanda's lawyer flipped through the documents, his expression growing more grim by the minute. I watched Amanda's face as the reality of her situation became clear. She'd expected to walk into a negotiation where she held all the cards. Instead, she was looking at evidence of multiple felonies that could send her to prison for years. "This is harassment," Amanda finally said, her voice shrill. "Sarah is just angry and trying to punish me for Michael's choices." "Michael's choices?" I asked quietly. "Is that what we're calling conspiracy to commit fraud now?" "I didn't conspire to do anything. Michael made his own decisions about his will." Marcus pulled out another document. "This is an email from you to Michael, dated 6 months before his death. Quote, we need to make sure Sarah can't challenge anything legally. Have you talked to Peterson about making the transfers look legitimate? End quote. Amanda's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent in her ear. She shook her head violently. My client would like to discuss a settlement, Hayes announced. No settlement, I said firmly. Amanda gets one choice, voluntary restitution or criminal prosecution. You can't prosecute me, Amanda snapped. I'm Jake's mother. If I go to prison, what happens to him? That's an interesting question, said Janet Morrison, the family law attorney I'd brought to the meeting. Given the evidence of child endangerment and psychological manipulation, CPS has already opened an investigation into Jake's welfare. If you're convicted of felony fraud, you'll likely lose custody regardless. The color drained from Amanda's face. You called CPS on me? CPS called themselves, Morrison continued, after Jake's school counselor filed a mandatory report about concerning behavior and statements. Apparently, coaching a child to lie to authorities triggered their intervention protocols. Jake won't be abandoned, I added. I've already started the process to petition for custody. As his biological father's widow and his aunt, I have legal standing. And unlike his current guardian, I don't have a criminal record or an active CPS investigation. Amanda stared at me in shock. This was clearly not a scenario she'd anticipated. You want to take Jake away from me? I want Jake to be safe and provided for, I replied. If that means protecting him from a mother who commits felonies and involves him in fraud schemes, then yes. Hayes whispered more urgently to Amanda, clearly trying to convince her to accept whatever deal was on the table. But Amanda's delusions ran too deep for smart legal strategy. "This is insane," she said, standing up abruptly. "Michael loved me. He wanted Jake to have his inheritance. Sarah is just bitter because she couldn't give him children." The silence that followed was deafening. Even her own lawyer looked embarrassed. "Michael loved you so much that he stayed married to me for 12 years, I said calmly. "Michael loved you so much that he hid your relationship and denied his son publicly. Michael loved you so much that instead of divorcing me and building a life with you, he chose to die as my husband while secretly planning to leave me destitute. He was protecting. He was using you," I interrupted. "Just like you used me. The difference is, I genuinely loved both of you. You saw us as obstacles to overcome." Marcus pulled out the final piece of evidence, printouts from Amanda's secret social media account. Pages and pages of posts where she documented her fantasy relationship with Michael, including recent posts celebrating my husband's death as their liberation. "This is your social media account, correct?" Marcus asked Amanda. "Where you posted, and I quote, 'finally free to live our truth. No more hiding, no more pretending Sarah matters. Michael and I can finally be the family we were meant to be.'" Hayes grabbed the printouts and read through them quickly. His professional composure finally cracked. "Amanda, what the hell is this?" he hissed. "It's evidence of premeditation," Morrison said cheerfully. "Your client documented her intent to defraud Sarah months before Michael's death. She celebrated his death as an opportunity to steal his widow's inheritance. And she involved a minor child in the conspiracy." "We need a recess," Hayes announced. "No," I said firmly. "We're done here. Amanda has 30 minutes to decide, voluntary restitution of all stolen assets, plus a formal admission of fraud that clears my legal claim to my marital property, or I file criminal charges this afternoon and petition for emergency custody of Jake tomorrow." "Sarah, please," Amanda said, her voice finally showing genuine fear. "Jake is my son. He needs his mother." "Jake needs a mother who doesn't commit felonies," I replied. "Jake needs a mother who doesn't manipulate him into keeping secrets that could destroy his psychological development. Jake needs stability, security, and adults who put his well-being above their own greed. I can give him that." "No, Amanda. You can't. Because you've proven that when forced to choose between Jake's well-being and your own interests, you'll sacrifice him every time." I stood up and gathered my purse. 29 minutes now. Marcus has the restitution paperwork ready for your signature. Hayes can advise you on the legal implications of refusing. As I walked toward the door, Amanda called out desperately. "What about our family? We're sisters." I turned back to look at her, this woman who'd shared my childhood, my parents, my entire life history. This woman who'd held my hand while I cried and celebrated my successes and comforted me through every major loss I'd ever experienced. This woman who'd spent years systematically planning my destruction while pretending to love me. "Sisters don't destroy each other," I said quietly. "Sisters don't steal their siblings' husbands and then celebrate their deaths. Sisters don't manipulate children and commit felonies and spend years planning how to leave their own family destitute. Sarah, I'm still your sister." "No," I said. "You stopped being my sister the day you decided I was disposable. You stopped being my sister when you chose greed over love. You stopped being my sister when you involved Jake in your lies. Please don't take Jake away from me." I paused at the door, considering her plea. For just a moment, I felt an echo of the love I'd once had for her, the protective instinct that had made me want to shield her from consequences throughout our childhood. But then I thought about Jake, 8 years old, confused and frightened, being coached to lie to adults who were trying to help him. Being used as a pawn in his mother's elaborate revenge fantasy. Growing up believing that love meant deception, that family meant manipulation, that the people who care about you will use you to hurt others. "I'm not taking Jake away from you," I said finally. "You took Jake away from yourself the day you decided to make him an accessory to fraud. I'm just making sure he has a chance to recover from the damage you've already done." I left Amanda crying in that conference room, facing the consequences of choices she'd made years before my husband ever got sick. Choices that had seemed so clever when she was making them. Choices that had finally caught up with her. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my restored home, the house that was now legally and unquestionably mine, making breakfast for Jake before school. The morning routine had become comfortable and natural, though it had taken time for both of us to adjust to our new reality. Jake was thriving in ways that surprised everyone, including the child psychologist who'd been helping him process the dramatic changes in his life. It turned out that living with secrets and manipulation had been far more stressful for him than anyone had realized. Once he was free to talk openly about his relationship with Michael, about his confusion over family dynamics, and about his fears that he'd done something wrong, his anxiety decreased dramatically. "Aunt Sarah," he said over his cereal, using the title we'd agreed on even though our relationship had evolved into something more parental, "can Tommy come over after school today?" "Of course," I replied, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, one of the few things I'd insisted on keeping when we'd sorted through the belongings from Amanda's apartment. "Did you ask his mom to pick him up, or should I drive him home?" "His mom said she'll get him at 6. Jake paused, then looked up at me with the serious expression that reminded me so much of Michael. "Aunt Sarah? Do you think Mom will come to my school play next week?" The question hit me in the chest, as these questions always did. Amanda was serving 18 months in minimum security prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud. The plea deal had allowed her to avoid more serious charges, but it had also resulted in the termination of her parental rights. I'd been granted full custody of Jake, with Amanda having limited supervised visitation rights upon her release. "I don't think so, sweetie," I said gently. "But I'll be there. And I'm going to record it so you can watch it afterward and see how proud I am." Jake nodded thoughtfully. These conversations had become easier over time, as he'd learned to understand his mother's choices in age-appropriate terms. The child psychologist had been invaluable in helping him process the complex emotions around loving someone who'd made very bad decisions. "That's okay," he said. "You're louder when you cheer anyway." I laughed, remembering the soccer game 2 months ago where I'd embarrassed him by standing up and shouting encouragement every time he touched the ball. "I'll try to control myself at the play." "No, don't." Jake grinned. "I like it when you're loud. It means you care." After dropping Jake at school, I drove to my new job. The insurance payout from Michael's policy, which had been restored to me as the legitimate beneficiary once the fraudulent will was overturned, had given me the financial breathing room to leave my old position and start working for a nonprofit that helped families navigate estate fraud. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful in a way my old corporate job had never been. My first client of the day was a woman named Patricia whose brother and sister-in-law had manipulated her elderly mother into changing her will. The tactics were eerily familiar: isolation, financial manipulation, exploitation of trust and love. But Patricia had caught on early, before the damage was irreversible. "The hardest part," Patricia told me, tears streaming down her face, "is that I still love them. Even knowing what they were planning to do. They're still my family." "I know," I said, handing her tissues. "That's what makes this kind of betrayal so devastating. They count on our love to make us hesitate, to make us doubt ourselves, to make us want to believe their lies. How did you get past that?" I thought about the question carefully. It was one I got often in my new role, and I'd learned that the answer was different for everyone. "I realized that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you," I said finally. "Real love, healthy love, doesn't require you to sacrifice your own well-being, your own security, your own future. When someone uses your love as a weapon against you, that's not love anymore. That's manipulation." Patricia nodded, scribbling notes in her notebook. "What happened to your sister? Do you ever talk to her?" "She writes letters," I admitted. "From prison. Letters where she tries to rewrite history, where she claims she was just looking out for Jake's interests, where she asks me to bring him for visits." "Do you respond?" "No. Because the letters aren't really about remorse or accountability. They're about control. She's still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to make herself the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own consequences. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? I considered the question, as I had many times over the past months. I think forgiveness is complicated. I don't hate Amanda anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I need that energy for Jake and for rebuilding my life. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean relationship. It doesn't mean pretending that what she did was acceptable or understandable. So you've moved on. I've moved forward, I corrected. Moving on suggests leaving the past behind completely. But my experience with Amanda taught me important things about recognizing manipulation, about setting boundaries, about protecting myself and the people I care about. I don't want to forget those lessons. That evening, after helping Jake with homework and listening to him practice his lines for the school play, I sat on my front porch with a glass of wine and reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been a trusting wife caring for a dying husband, supported by a sister I thought loved me unconditionally. I'd believed in the fundamental goodness of the people closest to me. Now I understood that trust is earned, not inherited. That family bonds don't automatically override personal integrity. That love without boundaries is often just enabling. That sometimes the people who know us best use that knowledge not to support us, but to exploit us. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. That I could investigate and strategize and fight for myself when necessary. That I could provide stability and security for a child who'd been caught in the crossfire of adult dysfunction. That I could build a new life based on authentic relationships and meaningful work. Jake appeared in the doorway, already in his pajamas. Aunt Sarah? Can you read me a story tonight? Of course, I said, finishing my wine and following him inside. Which book do you want? The one about the kid who finds out he's braver than he thought, Jake said, climbing into bed. I smiled, pulling his favorite adventure novel from the shelf. It was a story about a boy who discovers he has the strength to protect the people he loves, even when the adults in his life fail him. Jake had requested it almost every night for the past month. You know, I said, settling into the chair beside his bed, I think that's a story about both of us. Looking back on everything that happened, I have to ask you, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was living a double life? The comments section is full of people sharing their own stories of family betrayal, and honestly, reading them helps me realize how common this kind of manipulation really is. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps other people going through similar situations find these videos. And subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and building stronger boundaries. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're not crazy for questioning the people who claim to love them. Thank you for listening to my story and for all the support you've shown in the comments. I hope Jake and I have shown you that sometimes the worst betrayals can lead to the strongest recoveries. Family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up with integrity, who protects rather than exploits, and who helps you become the person you're meant to be. Remember, you deserve relationships based on honesty, respect, and genuine care. Don't let anyone convince you that love requires you to accept lies, manipulation, or betrayal. And if you're in a situation where you're questioning whether someone's behavior is normal or acceptable, trust your instincts. You're probably right. Take care of yourselves, and remember, karma doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like freedom.